You're listening to The Collected Podcast, bringing you stories that remind us who God is and who we are in Him. The Collected Podcast is a production of Collected Ministries. Follow Collected on social media at Collected Podcast, and be sure to visit thecollectedpodcast.com for show notes and additional content related to today's episode.
The Collected Podcast is sponsored in part by Beauty Counter. Use the link in our show notes to shop for all of your clean beauty needs, and 10% of the profits will go directly back to benefiting the podcast. Also, use the code CLEANFORALL20 for 20% off of your first purchase. Welcome to Season 7, Episode 10 of the Collected Podcast. I'm your host, Jess French, and this week I am very excited to bring you the next part in our Names of God series. This is part 11, so we've been at this for a while, and if you've heard these solo episodes before, then you know I'm going through and highlighting different names and character attributes of the Lord. I really believe that understanding who God is and who we are in Him are vital parts of walking in freedom and remaining rooted in who we are created to be. So this week, drumroll please, we are learning about Jehovah Shalom, the Lord, our peace. And I've been thinking about and praying about putting these different podcast episodes that I've been doing in this series into a book. And as I've been kind of fleshing out the idea for that book, I would want to start each section on a different name of God with an example of when I've experienced that character trait of God in my own life. And so I've been digging through old prayer journals and just spending time with the Lord, reflecting on when I have seen Him provide, when I have seen Him heal, when I've seen Him bring victory, when I've felt seen by Him, El Roy. So all of these things that we've been studying, I've been trying to recognize them more and more in my own life. And it's been such a fruitful, beautiful exercise. And I encourage you to do that too, as you learn about different attributes of God. Start to train your mind to identify them when you see them in your own life. You'll realize you see Him and experience Him more and more and more once you learn how to recognize it. So anyway, with Jehovah Shalom, I was looking back through old prayer journals and praying about it, and I was reminded of a brutal 10 days that I experienced in April 2020. And it wasn't COVID related, thankfully, but I had an aggressive autoimmune flare-up, like the worst I've ever had, unlike anything I had ever experienced before. And it had like fever and chills, among other things. But the worst part was that I had upwards of 50 ulcers in my mouth and throat. I mean, I was covered. The pain was excruciating. I couldn't talk. I couldn't eat or swallow. Like every breath was painful, even just to like constrict my throat at all. All I wanted to do was cry, but I didn't even have the energy to do that because I hadn't eaten in days. Could barely even stand up. So the whole thing was about 10 days, but the worst part of it before my medicine started to kick in was about this 3-day period where all I could do was try and lay as still as possible and even try to like breathe as gently and as slowly as possible. And during that time, I was listening to worship music, and the music and the Psalms carried me through. I was looking back, and my journals at that time were a lot of Psalm 4, just being such a comfort. So I want to start today by reading Psalm 4. Answer me when I call to you, my righteous God. I had made a note on that line that just made me weep. I couldn't weep too aggressively because it hurt. But there were tears. I was weeping in my mind. But that just hit me because I felt David's like plea in that. Like, answer me when I call to you, my righteous God. I am calling to you. Why won't you answer me? It was like the heart I felt behind that. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. That was like my heart, I've just felt that so deeply. How long will your people turn my glory into shame? How long will you love delusions and seek false gods? That one didn't apply to me as much. But know, verse 3, know that the Lord has set apart his faithful servant for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. He does hear, even if you don't get that immediate answer. The Lord hears you. Verse 4, tremble and do not sin. When you are on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. I was on my bed for days and I was forced to be silent. It hurt too much to talk. It's like this forced silence, which ended up being this beautiful, sweet time of hearing from the Lord, even in the midst of the pain. It goes on a few verses later, fill my heart with joy when their grain and new wine abound. In peace I lie down and sleep. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. Even in the middle of the pain, God's peace sustained me. I was forced to be silent before the Lord, and the peace I experienced didn't take away the pain, but it carried me through. The peace of the Lord is one of the greatest gifts, I believe, that he has given to us in this life. And the most beautiful thing about it is that it's something the world cannot take away. It can sustain us even when we're shaken. No matter what forces come against us, his peace can still remain. And so I want to dig into that name today to see what new richness we can learn about the character of God. So the first time that we see the title of Jehovah Shalom, the Lord our peace, used in the Bible is in the book of Judges. This book, if you're not familiar with it or haven't read it yet, it records a period of about 350 years in Israel's history after they have conquered the land of Canaan. The people are now living in the land that God has promised them, but they're not upholding their end of the covenant. As they continue to fall into patterns of sin and idolatry, God allows them to be conquered by foreign nations. After each period of oppression, the people remember the one true God. They cry out to him, and God sends a deliverer, bringing peace back to the land. This cycle would happen 12 times throughout the book of Judges. So our study today takes us to Judges chapters 6 through 8, when the nation of Israel has been conquered by a fierce nomadic tribe called the Midianites. And we see the Midianites many, many times throughout the Old Testament. Their history is very closely woven with the Israelites. They're actually very distant relatives. But we're not getting into all of that today, but just keep the Midianites in mind. And the Israelites were being oppressed under Midian control for about 7 years when we come to the point in our story when God called the judge Gideon to free his people. Gideon's background stood out to me as I started to learn about him. I learned that his father was a worshiper of Baal, one of the false gods, and yet Gideon still chose to believe in and follow the God of Abraham. And this felt like a significant detail that I wanted to camp out on for a second, because I believe it will encourage somebody out there who feels very alone in your faith. Maybe you're the only believer in your circle of friends or in your family. And if this is you, then please keep this detail at the back of your mind as we learn about Gideon. My hope would be that you are encouraged by the way that God sought Gideon out and used him in mighty ways, even though he often felt alone and afraid. The thing in his life, his faith, that must have felt difficult and isolating as he was growing up was the very thing that allowed him to become a nation changer. I mean, think about that. The thing that made him feel alone and afraid was the very thing that God used him to change the nation of Israel, to bring the people out of bondage and oppression. So I think somebody out there needed that reminder that the thing in your life that you're afraid of right now, or that makes you feel alone or isolated, is the very same thing that God is going to use to bring you to new and powerful and incredible places. So We can't spend too much more time on that, but just keep that in mind as we keep going. So we first meet Gideon in Judges 6:11. He's threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. So you may not know a lot about threshing wheat. I sure didn't. But apparently it is something that typically would have been done in large open spaces or on a hilltop so that the wind could separate the chaff naturally. Threshing wheat in a winepress just wasn't effective. Gideon was responding to the aggression of the Midianites by living in fear and hiding. We could argue that this was justified, though. I mean, listen to these few verses in Judges 6:2-6 about the oppression that the Israelites were facing. These verses say, because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped out on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. So the sins of Israel had led to their destruction and forced them into hiding in caves. And I want to pause there and kind of bring it home and maybe more relevant to our lives and ask, is there any sin in your life right now that is forcing you into hiding in one way or another? Maybe you're living with shame or fear or guilt from something you've done. The Israelites were waiting and crying out for someone to save them. But the massive difference in our lives today is that we have already been saved. The work that Jesus did on the cross is enough to cover anything you've ever done and anything you could ever do. Freedom from sin, guilt, shame, and fear is yours to access by simply calling on the name of Jesus. You are already forgiven, and you no longer have to hide in your metaphorical cave. The Israelites had very literal caves. So if this hits home for you, I want to pause and encourage you to spend some time today in prayer. Don't put it off. Confess to God and accept the forgiveness that He offers. Release the shame, guilt, and fear to Him, and then praise Jesus for the work that He did on the cross so that we can walk in freedom. So if you need to pause now, you have complete freedom. Pause. I'll be waiting for you here when you come back. So back to Gideon hiding out in the winepress. It is a place of darkness and confusion when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, saying, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." I love that God calls Gideon a mighty warrior. There's nothing that Gideon has done up to this point that would indicate that he is a mighty warrior, but the Lord sees who He created us to be, and He speaks to us the truth of who we are. Even though Gideon couldn't see that in himself, God saw it and called to him by his true identity. The first part of that greeting is equally, if not more important. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Gideon's ability to become the mighty warrior that he was created to be is rooted in the fact that the Lord was with Gideon. Gideon could not step into his true identity and calling on his own. The events that were about to take place would only be possible with the help of the Lord. The fact that the Lord was with Gideon and that the Lord is with you is the source of all strength, joy, provision, wisdom, freedom, and, as we will see today, peace. So let's continue with the story. Next, we see that Gideon asks for a sign to confirm that it is truly the Lord who is speaking to him. He places goat meat and unleavened bread on a rock and covers it with broth. The angel of the Lord then touches the meat and bread with the tip of his staff, and fire flared from the rock, completely consuming the meat and bread. Verses 20 through 24 explain what happened next. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace, do not be afraid. You are not going to die." So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." I love that Gideon builds the altar to Jehovah Shalom, the Lord is peace, before he knows what is in store. God will end up reducing Gideon's army, military strategy, and weapons, and yet Gideon will still believe and trust in God. God sees the full picture of the battle that would lie ahead for Gideon and the battles that are still in store for us. He will give us what we need before we even realize we need it. God may be teaching you something now because he knows you will need it for what is yet to come. And I think that great peace can be found in knowing that nothing surprises God. Also in knowing that nothing is too hard for God. In Judges 7, we see that Gideon is setting out for battle with 32,000 men, which sounds like a lot, but he may already feel outmatched because the Midianites number 135,000. And yet God makes him cut down his numbers 3 times until Gideon is down to only 300 soldiers. It's an incredible story. I do encourage you to go read Judges chapter 7. I'm giving you a very high view summary, but it's a great story. So go read like how they whittled down the number of soldiers little by little. So in their own strength, the Israelite army would have no chance of defeating the mighty Midian army. But God brought the victory with this small group of faithful warriors. In the Enduring Word commentary, David Guzik explains, "If we really believe the principle, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts, then our smallness does not matter. If we really believe the principle, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God, then smallness does not matter." End quote. So the size of your bank account, the size of your confidence, the size of your community does not matter when God is on your side. Even when you feel small and insignificant, he can make a way and sustain you with peace as you face a seemingly impossible situation. This season of Israel's history could easily be described as one of turmoil, hardship, and oppression. Yet in this season, God reveals himself as peace, even in the turmoil, hardship, and oppression. So as we're going through the story, we see those 3 things have not stopped at the moment when we learn that Jehovah Shalom, the Lord is our peace, is present with Israel, even though, again, they are still in turmoil, hardship, and oppression. So this makes me believe that God does not define peace as we would traditionally define peace. So what version of peace do you expect God to bring? Think about it. Pause if you need to. Think about it. I think I often associate words like comfort, tranquility, ease, quiet as synonyms of peace. Yet biblical history shows that peace can be found in the loudest, hardest, most uncomfortable, most challenging, chaotic times in the lives of Christ followers. In John 14:27, Jesus, the Prince of Peace, says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give to you. Let your heart not be troubled. Let it not be fearful." In these words, we see that the peace of God does not ensure outward peace. Rather, it's an internal peace of freedom from fear and anxiety. These words of Jesus presented a radical new way of thinking about peace to his audience. At this time, when Jesus speaks these words, the Israelites were under the control of the Roman Empire, and they believed that the Messiah would come to free them from Roman rule and would reestablish Israel as a sovereign nation. As we now know, this earthly peace wasn't Jesus' main objective. He came to bring eternal peace with God for those who follow him. In this same chapter in John, Jesus opens by urging his disciples, do not let your hearts be troubled. However, Jesus, just before this, had given them a decent amount of troubling information. One of his disciples would betray him, one would deny him. So Jesus is proclaiming that even in the middle of troubling situation, our hearts can still be at peace. And this contradicts every natural tendency of mankind. I love the way that David Guzik explains it from the same Enduring Word commentary that I quoted above or earlier in the show. He says, Jesus never wanted us to have life without trouble, but he promised that we would have an untroubled heart even in a troubled life. That is true for you. You can have an untroubled heart even in a troubled life. I feel like that deserves a breath and a pause. What would that look like for you to have an untroubled heart, even in the midst of your troubles in your life right now? I mean, I can't answer that for you, but I think that that is hitting somebody right now. Throughout all of biblical history, man's expectations rarely line up with what God has planned. And I can bet that some people out there have experienced that in their own life, that the expectations you had for your life or your situation are not lining up with the reality of what is coming to fruition in your life. Yet God's ways are higher than we can imagine, and the peace that he is bringing is a spiritual peace. It may also lead to outward peace with others, but that is often a byproduct of peace with God. That's not the original intent. So I want to shift gears just a little bit. I know it's kind of a jarring transition, but I wanted to talk about the Hebrew language. I'm by no means an expert in Hebrew at all, but I wanted to dig deeper into the word shalom, because I know this is a very common word in the Hebrew language. It's used a lot. So I did some digging into the language in general. So according to the Rosen School of Hebrew, the Hebrew language exhibits a pattern of stems consisting typical of a trilateral, like 3 consonant root pattern, from which nouns, adjectives, and verbs are formed. So again, so typically there's like 3 roots that are just a series of consonants, and then you put the vowels in between, and that will form the word. So the vast majority of words in the Hebrew language can be boiled down to a 3 consonant root word. The root contains the essence of the word's meaning. Hebrew words are formed from roots by changing vowels and by adding a wealth of prefixes and suffixes to that root. So a little different than our Greek and Latin roots that a lot of the English language is based on. Maybe a little confusing, but let's break down the Hebrew word shalom. So shalom, often meaning peace, wholeness, or completeness, comes from the roots of 3 consonants, the SH blend, L, and M. So SH, L, M. These root consonants were then combined with various vowels to create words with similar meanings. So we already know shalom adds the A and the O, but some other Hebrew words with the same root patterns are really, really interesting and really powerful when we dig into it. So another root that has this 3 consonant pattern, the same one as shalom, and please forgive me if I am mispronouncing these. Again, not a Hebrew scholar. So one of the words is hishtalem, meaning it was worth it. Another word with the same consonant pattern is shulam, was paid for. Mishulam, paid for in advance. Mushlam, perfect. And shalem, whole. So these other words that share the same essence as shalom mean it was worth it, was paid for in advance, perfect, whole. looking at each of these words, I love how they complement each other perfectly and add such rich meaning to the title of Jehovah Shalom. God as our peace makes whole that which was broken by sin. He brings peace between the natural and the supernatural through the complete and atoning work of Jesus on the cross. We can experience complete, perfect peace because he paid for it in advance, and it was all worth it for the saving of even one life. Charles Stanley describes it this way: God's peace is not an escape from reality. We are not transfixed or somehow mentally removed from feeling pain or struggling. Rather, peace is an undergirding rock-solid foundation so that no matter the tears we cry or the sorrow we feel, deep down inside we know that an abiding assurance that God is with us. God is in control, and the joy of the Lord is going to emerge far greater than any depth of agony we may be experiencing. That's good. Leave it to Charles Stanley. He's so good. So the difficult situation that you're facing, the trial, the challenge, the pain right now might not change immediately. It might not even change in this life, but you are never alone. The Prince of Peace paved the path of reconciliation so that you are no longer an enemy of God. Rather, you can rest in the peace of being his son or daughter and knowing that he will never leave you. He will never forsake you. And that is the solid foundation of Jehovah Shalom, the peace that everything else in our life is built upon. So that is what I have for you today. I hope something in this was encouraging or filled you with peace in some way. And remember, that peace did not actually come from this episode. It comes from the truth of who God is and who he created you to be and who you are in him. So I hope that this spurs you on to want to know him more and to dig in deeper. Please, please, please go read Judges 6-8 and learn about this story on your own. Learn more about the life of Gideon. I barely skimmed the surface. This one took me so long to prepare because there were so many different directions I could have gone with Gideon, this mighty warrior, and this story that takes place in Israel's history. So read it yourself and see what new things that God reveals to you about his character and about how he sees you. So I hope you have a wonderful week. We will be back in 2 Thursdays, and I have an amazing interview lined up. I'm so excited. I've already recorded it. It was pre-recorded, and it is a good one. So please stick with us, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Collected Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. And if you like what you've heard, we'd love it if you'd help spread the word. Check back here for new episodes dropping every other Thursday. You can follow along on social media at Collected Ministries.